Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Brian E. Roach and Zach Metkler.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Brian Roach, the host, who, as we have mentioned in the past, doesn't like toast. And I continue to dislike toast, although I have to share this because I was watching an episode of Family Feud, or Best Answers on Family Feud, and the question was, name some a way you would toast someone, and the woman answered, over a fire. I loved that. Okay, so that kind of toast is kind of funny. It makes me happy. Anyway, before we get rolling, I just want to remind everybody about the March of Dimes contest that we still have running. It runs until the 29th of this month. That means we've got about 21 days, 3 weeks left. When it's over, if you have made a donation to the March of Dimes, you have a chance to win a autographed Troy Polamalu jersey. It'll be a great prize. It's a great cause. Check it out on steelcityunderground.com. And now is the time of year that is filled with promise and hope and joy and frustration and nonsense as well. It's draft season, and we're going to talk about the draft. And to help me do that, I'd like to welcome back Zach Metkler to the podcast. Zach, how you doing tonight?
It's my favorite time of year. You know, I can never be happier than when it's draft season. And, you know, to be on here, get the opportunity to talk about Brian. I look forward to it.
Absolutely. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to call this episode 3 Picks for Every Round. And, our goal is to try and, Zach and I are going to bounce some ideas off, basically saying, here's 3 guys we think the Steelers might target in each round, and why they might, and why they might even be there. And, you know, when we get to 5th and 7th rounds where we have double picks, I don't know that we're going to have 6 guys, but we may have more than 3 because we have two picks in those rounds. Anyway, so that's the premise here, because the Steelers have done, I think, a solid job of preparing themselves for this draft in the sense that they've really sort of resolved all the most glaring needs that they had. Not necessarily for long-term solutions, not necessarily to high-end solutions, but they've put themselves in a position, I think, where they don't have to reach for a pick. What do you think, Zach?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, you think about right now the signings of Burnett and Bostic. Both of them have been starters in the league. You know, Bostic a little less so than Burnett, but in the grand scheme of things, those are 2 guys that if they don't feel that a player that they want is there at safety or linebacker, they don't have to reach for them. You know, they're pretty solidified those 2 spots, and they had to start either Burnett or Bostic or both for an extended period of time next season as a rookie developed, or they didn't get the guy that they wanted in the draft. I don't think there's the pressure to reach for a guy. So realistically, when you look at the draft, you see this every single year where teams reach on guys that really have no business going there because they're just trying to fill a position of need with a guy that really shouldn't be there. And really all the draft is about is trying to find good value and how much that kind of goes along with talent. So by the Steelers having those type of holes filled through the, kind of under the radar signings they had in free agency, I really think they've set themselves up nicely to move forward, to kind of take a best player available approach while still kind of trying to target needs that would help them for the long term, not just in the short term as well.
Right. And we had an interesting new mock draft that came out, I think today or yesterday, from the wizardly world of Pro Football Focus, which they could just be conjuring things out of toadstools and other things. I don't know what they do, but for some reason they suddenly decided Tremaine Edmunds was going to fall to us. I think that we shouldn't get too excited about that. What do you think?
I mean, honestly, if Tremaine Edmunds were to fall all the way down to 28, I think there's about 27 GMs in the NFL that need to take a hard look in the mirror and wonder what they were doing on draft night. I think he's done nothing but shoot himself up into the solidified conversation being the number 1 inside linebacker in this year's class. He has the position flexibility to kind of move around on the second level. He has holes in this game. He's not a perfect prospect, but when you look at just the fact that he's 19, he's doing what he's doing right now at this point in his career, realistically, he has a very bright future ahead of him if he can put it all together.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's every chance he's a top 10 pick, maybe even a top 5 pick, if depending on how the board falls. Although, I'm still kind of hoping that all 4 of the first picks are quarterbacks, so that just pushes everybody down. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. All right. So the Steelers take their first stab at this draft at pick 28 in the first round. The Steelers very rarely move up. I can't even think of a time they moved out of the first round. So I think we can throw out the concept that they're going to trade back, even though we speculate about it often and say, sometimes it's a good idea. I just can't see it this season or this draft. But what do you think could tempt the Steelers into trying to move up in this draft?
I mean, I think realistically, you saw, I think the last time I could really notably think about a really kind of big blockbuster trade was the Troy Polamalu draft year. And I think that really just came with, they were completely enamored with him as a prospect. And I think realistically, the Steelers really have to feel great about some player that's really high up on their big board that's falling, further than they originally expected. If they were on their big board a top 5, top 10 player, and all of a sudden we're looking at like pick 15, pick 17, they're still sitting there. I think the Steelers would be tempted to put in a order to move forward. They don't have as much draft capital as you would want them to have in other years to kind of move up and try to finagle their way up to get a guy like that. A guy that pops into my mind is a player like Derwin James, just because he's another safety. I feel like kind of has the versatility to do a lot of things on the defense, but a guy like him starts falling, maybe they move up for him, maybe they don't. I don't, like you said, I don't expect the Steelers to move at all. That's really, it hasn't been their MO, especially in the first round. But I think if there is a guy there, whoever it may be, that they really are just absolutely enamored with and want to go and try to get him and think that he can be this transcendent talent that could really help them win now, I think that's what it's going to take for them to move up. Otherwise, I think they're going to be pretty much standing put right where they are at 28.
Yep, I agree. So I think that's going to be our premise for this first pick. So we'll kind of flip it back and forth, and I'll let you start. Give me your first guy you think is within the Steelers' radar and might be a pick they'd take at 28.
So, there's even with the signings of Burnett and Bostic, in my mind, safety and inside linebacker are still the two biggest needs for the Steelers. And right now, I used to be really kind of high up on the Rashaan Evans train, but as of late, I was really trying to push against this and not kind of fall into it, but I really fallen in love with, as the man that we've so eloquently given the, abbreviated lazy nickname LVE in the back rooms, Leighton Vander Esch. It's kind of the guy right now that, I'm worried because he's only a 1-year wonder. He's only really had 1 year experience to really put it all together, but you can't deny the tape looked good when you're watching him last year at Boise State. I think he still has a lot of development to go. I don't think he's ready to step in day one. And because of the signing of John Bostic, I think they can afford to have him, kind of take what we saw with Artie Burns and Sean Davis, two other raw rookies we saw a couple years ago, who drafted earlier on to be the guys that the Steelers wanted them to be, but we didn't see them ease into action until maybe, mid-season, like week 4, week 6, week 8. I think if you draft a guy like Vander Esch who can come in and, be a guy that the Steelers like and think that he's this versatile linebacker, heat-seeking missile with great instincts, without having to pressure him into playing time right away, I think that's an optimal situation for a guy with his inexperience. It's kind of like, we saw T.J. Watt last year. He's not an inexperienced football player. He had starting experience at Wisconsin, but he was just inexperienced at the point of not really having a whole lot on-field tape to go off of except for really just 1 year. And that paid off well for him. I know there's a lot of discussion about the fact that the Steelers don't like going for non-Power 5 players in the first round. I think that's more coincidence more than it is just, tried and true draft philosophy on their part. I know they like big school guys, but I think you look in recent years, there really haven't been anybody like Vander Esch who was there that you could really say was a small school guy that really deserved to go in the first round when the Steelers were picking. So for that, in my mind, he's a guy that I really think should be on the Steelers' radar. I think is on the Steelers' radar. And if he's there at 28, will very much be in play.
Yeah, I agree. That's actually one of the guys I have on my list as well. And the nice thing is, I think he's a junior, coming out as a junior, so he's still a young guy. He still has plenty of developmental time. It's the kind of guy that you like from the standpoint of allowing him to sit behind some veterans for part of the year and let him make the push to be a starter, as opposed to just trying to throw him out there as an inexperienced guy. I was not in the LVE. I'm going to start calling him Love and just give him the O in there. I didn't have the love for LVE early on. I liked him. I liked him as a prospect. I was a little hesitant to give him a first round grade, and I still am, to be quite honest, because of that single year of production. But he really blew the combine up, and I was really impressed with his 20-yard and 60-yard shuffle. He was pretty fast, although not super fast. And he's the kind of guy at inside linebacker that I think the Steelers really need at this point. So I agree with you. I think he could be a target if he lasts that long. And as the mock draft season has gone on, I've noticed that Van Der Esch has been pushing his way up and up and up in people's estimations, going as high as the top 10 in at least 2 different mocks I've seen, which I think is absolutely absurd and way too high for him. But there's certainly is a chance he could go in the teens, especially the low teens, if the right team's there, like somebody like Tennessee might take a stab at him. There is a lot of teams out there that have linebacker needs.
100%. And Van Der Esch has that profile of a guy that you're going to see potentially go earlier than any of us would expect, just because a lot of teams have inside linebacker needs. A lot of them see a potential in a guy like Van Der Esch who, has a potential for trying to make plays and trying to get after the football and be that every down linebacker that, has become almost a necessity in the ever-evolving NFL. So he's the type of prospect that I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's there at 28, and I also wouldn't be surprised if he was gone, in the top 15, top 20, and just depending on how the board falls, because guys like him, teams salivate over because he tested so well, because he has the intangibles, because he has the instincts that you just can't coach a player to have, regardless if it was a one-year wonder or otherwise. So, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him go earlier. But if he was sitting there, I think the Steelers would be hard-pressed to at least consider drafting him at 28.
Yeah. So since you took him as your first guy, I'm going to take Rashaan Evans because he's the other guy that you were talking about. And I still like Evans maybe a tiny bit more than I like Van Der Esch, primarily for 2 completely different reasons. One, which is somewhat practical, and the other is just because I don't know, call it it tugs my heartstrings, because and that one is because his comparison on NFL.com is Lawrence Timmons. So so that just tugs up. It feels like there's a purpose there. But I mean, Evans, at least he's got much more of a series of tape than Van Der Esch does. He's been consistent. It bothers me a little bit that he hasn't run the 40. That does throw up some red flags. I think as a result of certain things that he's doing, he could drop and could end up certainly being there at 28. But he's not going to drop into the second round where they pick. But he could find himself dropping out of the first round depending on how things fall. I like his length. I like his speed from what we see on tape. I think he's very quick to diagnose things. I don't think he has the kind of change of direction that Van Der Esch has shown in some of that tape, because it's kind of almost scary sometimes the way he is just bam and changes the direction he's going when he diagnoses things. But I really do. I like Evans. I think if Van Der Esch is gone, if there is no other viable starting linebacker or linebacker type for them to pick there, and the guys that they like at safety are also off the board, I can see them narrowing in. They were all at the pro day in Alabama, so I can see Evans being on their radar as well.
Yeah, that's the thing. I still have Evans actually ranked above Van Der Esch on my big board, just due to the fact that I think, like you said, there is more tape there for him. He is. I trust Alabama defenders, probably more than I should. But there's just there's the reputation of having NFL track record and bloodlines coming from Alabama. He's a hard hitting linebacker. He is very instinctual with what he does and how he plays as well, which is nothing to take away from LVE. They both are very intelligent football players. I wouldn't be mad to see him be the pick, but like you said, the 40-yard dash thing, I don't put a lot of inventory into what numbers they end up running, but when I see a player now pass up twice on running the 40-yard dash at a position where it could be important with how teams are wanting to see some athletic traits when it comes to linebacker play in today's league, I would like to see him run it. So him not running it does concern me a little bit. Is there an underlying injury that we might not hear about until after the draft that's kind of holding him back? Or is it just simply he's not confident in his numbers and he's trying to preserve his draft stock, which honestly could end up being a double-edged sword depending on how it plays out for him. So personally, I wouldn't be surprised, even though I have Evans above Van Der Esch on my big board, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Evans ends up slipping out of the first, or at least later in the first after the Steelers pick in those last couple picks of the first round. So he's a prospect I think could go either way. He could end up being a very targeted prospect in the middle of the first, or he could end up just ultimately falling out altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so who do you got? Who's your second guy in the first round?
So he's a guy I've been pounding the drum for a while now. Justin Reed, safety out of Stanford. I see a lot of Sean Davis with a lot of things that he does, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because I think he has more of the cover instincts that Davis was kind of lacking coming out of Maryland. I think ultimately whenever you watch him on tape, you see a guy, or at least I see a guy, realistically that could play all over the field. You could put him up in a single high safety because he has the speed, he has the athleticism, and he has the ball tracking skills to be able to go and cover field and cover ground quickly from sideline to sideline on his own. He's shown excellent ability to kind of be a man cover safety when dropping down and covering up tight ends, covering up slot receivers and things of that nature. I think realistically that, and then seeing the ball productivity that he's had as a defensive back, those are things that in my mind either you have or you don't. And a lot of times it's lucky, but a lot of times you see defensive backs, and Steelers fans should be all too familiar with players like Ike Taylor having a reputation for having stone hands. So interceptions are not always a given. I remember there was the interception last year against the Patriots where Sean Davis very easily could have had the pick, would have hopefully preserved the game, didn't, dropped it, and the game obviously, is infamous at this point. So in my mind, a guy like Reed is a player that you could potentially sit in there, play or sooner rather than not, because I think he is one of the more pro-ready safeties in this draft class that's not a Minka Fitzpatrick or Derwin James. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him go in there and have the versatility to kind of move around and do a lot of different coverage things that the Steelers want from one of their safeties.
Yeah, we've been talking. I could have pulled that one out of my own hat for you. I knew that he was going to be in this in this pairing. We've talked about you have been beating his drum for a long time, and when you look at him, he looks like a guy that the Steelers can use. It's funny because the guys who have big boards out there, the big name guys, have him all over the place. They've got him as late as the second. There's a couple of crazy guys who have him going in the third. That's not going to happen. He's not going to go as late as the Steelers pick in the second. He's going to be gone before then, unless something really weird happens. But I can't argue. I think if circumstances fall the right way, he certainly could be a guy. And I know that there was a lot. People tried to make a whole lot of speculation about the fact that on his pro day they went to, I think it was Ohio State, but I can't remember. They didn't send anybody out to Stanford's pro day because it was the same day as another team. But I think they have a meeting scheduled with him. Is that not correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I don't know if it happened already. If they plan on bringing him in for a pre-draft visit. So
yeah. So I mean, Eric has done this the last two seasons, talked about, how you can try and interpret where the Steelers are going to go based on their pre-draft moves. And it is fairly accurate to say they generally are not pulling things out of a hat where they haven't had any kind of meeting with the player. But, it doesn't mean they had to go to his pro day. So if they've had a meeting with Reed, he's on their radar. So it certainly is a viable option. My second guy, since and I'm going to make him my last guy because I agree with you on Van Der Esch, is Darius Geis, because Joe and I talked about this at length with the Le'Veon Bell situation, and I'm not visiting it again because we did 3 shows on it, and that was enough. But it is. I think that it's a given at this point. If he isn't signed to a long-term contract, he's gone after 2018. And if that's the case, it would behoove the Steelers to be prepared for that situation. And you also don't know, what could or couldn't happen as time goes by. And maybe Le'Veon stews on it a little bit, starts to get in his head, and decides he's not going to come in or he's not going to do stuff to be ready. I don't think he's going to poo-poo $14 million away, but you never know. He also believes he deserves 17. So, hey, whatever. I think I like Goose. I can't say his name. But I'm just going to call him Darius because he's my pal. He's my bud. And I really like him as a potential pick because when you watch him run, he's a Steelers running back. He's a tough back. He doesn't shy away from contact. He delivers punishment when he runs. He's a brutal runner. This is a guy I just think that he could fit in well. I'm not sure how that he necessarily has to be a 3-down back. I'm not sure that he has to take the full brunt of the workload. But when you take somebody like James Conner and somebody like him and tandem them up, that could conceivably be a running back group that could work. So I think this could protect them in the long term. And the only reason I think you go that way is if all the other big needs are gone and you feel like it's going to be a reach to take a safety or a linebacker at 28 at this point because the guys you had targeted are gone. So that's my other guy for the first round. What do you think of him?
Well, that's also added as my last guy as well for the first round, so we matched up with that
there
one.
You go.
In my mind, I'm not necessarily the fan of taking a running back in the first round, especially in the second half of the first round. I think in recent seasons we've seen you can kind of find running backs at different points during the draft that have the ability to come in and be effective, but at the same time, I think in most any other seasons, guys would be the unquestioned number 1 running back if you didn't have a superhuman, freak of nature in the weight room and on the football field and Saquon Barkley. I think realistically, you see a guy like Geis. At one point, he was extremely close second in my running back rankings to Barkley. I think what his downhill running style, his powerful nature, it's reminiscent of like a beast mode type player. I think his ability to go downhill, I don't know realistically in the grand scheme of things. If the injuries we saw this past year at LSU are kind of an omen of things to come because just due to his playing styles, that could mean he's going to miss a lot of time on the field, or is it just a fluke? In my mind, I think it's a risk you take with a guy like him because hard-nosed running backs that have the ability to go downfield wear defenses out, and having a guy like James Conner in there as well, they could potentially add more of a, slasher, scat back type player. They want to go by a trial by committee, which we've seen a lot of success around in the league as of late. I think it's there to have a guy like Geis be your kind of leadoff hitter and be able to go and just be able to run between the tackles, be a decent receiver, have a downhill style between the tackles, off tackle. That kind of gives you the ability to do a lot of different things and, really wear down defenses, which, Le'Veon Bell, they're 2 different players when it comes to their style. You have Bell's patient style. He has still, in my opinion, has the nastiest stiff arm in the league. But he doesn't have that real burst in power. He does have quick change. He does have a really great ability of changing directions quickly, but I don't think that really necessarily is directly relatable to just straight up power. through the line. I think Geis has that. He's a stocky, reminds me almost like of a bigger muscle hamster type running back, So in my mind, I think he's a guy that just feels like he should be a Steeler.
Yep, I agree. So I guess we can move to the second round now. And again, I don't think that they're going to move around in here. I just don't think they have the ammunition that they need to make a lot of moves in this draft. I think they're going to be fairly static. While there's an outside chance in the third they could move up if they feel like they need to. I still don't think they can move in the second, but I could be wrong. But I'm going to go first because you went first last time, since we paired up on a couple guys there. And my first guy in the second round is Jesse Bates, the safety from, I don't remember now, Wake Forest, I think.
Yeah.
And I really, again, I think this is a guy that he can be an extra player for them. He can be the guy who lines up alongside Sean Davis. I like his fluidity. I like his ability to cover in man coverage. I think he's very instinctive. And, I just think it's another guy that if he's there, and I'm not certain he will be, I'm not sure he will last. If they start running safeties out the door quickly in this draft, and there for some reason is a run, he'll never be there at 28. But he could be, and I think there's a better chance that he's there. As I said earlier, I think there's a way better chance Jesse Bates is there at 28 than Justin Reed is at this point. So that's my guy in the second round, assuming they haven't taken a safety in the first round.
Yeah, I also had Bates on my list as well, and just due to the fact that I think realistically he is the most pure center field safety in this draft class when it comes to just straight up single high guy that you could have back there roving, looking for for a player as a last line defense. I don't think there's any other safeties in this class that really match up with his profile. And he has deficits when it comes to tackling. He's not necessarily the most surefire tackler because he doesn't always go for the big hit, but his tackling form isn't quite there. But when you have a guy with the natural cover skills that he has, you can live with the tackling because tackling is much more coachable than the ability to cover. I think having a guy like Burnett who really kind of fits that dime backer, dime safety role for the Steelers at this point moving forward, and Sean Davis who has versatility to kind of do it all, having a guy like Bates in the second level or third level, as a single high safety with the ability to cover would be an excellent addition for the Steelers. I just, like you said, I don't know if he's there. I have him with a grade around mid to late half of the second. I just think that we've seen in recent years safeties are such a hard position to predict where they go because they're so hard to come by in the draft, harder than you expect them to be.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you see them go earlier than you would expect. Like I look back at the 2016 draft when Carl Joseph and Keanu Neal were both projected to go in like the late first to early second, and both of them were top 20, top 15 picks. It's stuff like that happens every single year. So a guy like Bates starts falling. I wouldn't be surprised if a team traded up to get him. But if he were to be there at the end of the second round, I think he's a no-brain pick.
Yep. All right. Who else do you got for the second?
So another guy I have for the second is a guy that I think realistically, I am surprised I haven't heard a lot more rumors about him coming to the Steelers. It's Lorenzo Carter, outside linebacker from Georgia. I've had the opportunity to watch a lot of Georgia tape as of late, and I like what he does on the game film just routinely. I think he also kind of fits a profile of what we've seen more recently with kind of athletic, really kind of measurable based outside linebackers and edge rushers from the Steelers with guys like TJ Watt, Bud Dupree. He has that long frame. He's 6'6", 250. He can cover a lot of ground really quickly just because he has these ridiculously long strides. Lateral agility is great. I would trust him to be covering out in the flats like we kind of saw Watt and Dupree do last season. So when I think of the new age Steelers edge rushers and outside linebackers, Carter's a guy that I think reasonably fits that bill. He's kind of a hit and miss prospect, I think, because I don't think he really necessarily lived up to a lot of the lofty expectations that were set on him coming into the SEC as a defensive player. But I think realistically his best days of football are still ahead of him if he gets the proper coaching and can kind of add on to his frame a little bit to not be as kind of gangly and lanky as he is right now. And if he is able to do that, I think realistically he could be a very solid day 2 pick for the Steelers and eventually move into a spot with Dupree if the Steelers end up moving on from him if they don't exercise his 5th-year option. So I think edge is still a position that needs to be addressed at some point, because even though I am a fan of Dupree and think he still has the ability to move forward and kind of be the guy that the Steelers thought he would be, he hasn't shown enough right now for them to feel comfortable enough to not at least consider drafting an edge rusher at some point earlier on in this year's draft.
Yeah, I'm giving you that, like, I'm looking at you thing, that eye to eye thing, because maybe people aren't going to believe this, but that's one of my other guys too in this round, and we absolutely did not pre-discuss who we were picking.
No, I don't think we've had a conversation about Lorenzo Carter up to this point either, to be honest with you.
No, not at all. And it really is. I kind of have a 3rd-round grade on him more so than I have a 2nd-round grade on him, but when you get down to 28, really, you're almost a 3rd-round pick. You're looking at guys who are right on the cusp. And if I have a 3rd-round grade on him, it's high 3rd round. So I just look at it and think, I don't think there's going to be a linebacker of value there at this point. I don't know for sure, other than Bates, is there going to even be a safety there? And again, depending on where other things have happened, there is potentially a need for an edge rusher, even though that room is going to be pretty full next year, because we don't want to forget Keon Adams coming back. Even though he was a 7th rounder, there was a lot of buzz around him. And he could be in the conversation this season as a guy who can get to the roster. But they do need to look at what happens if they're not going to exercise, as you said, Bud Dupree's option. I think they probably will, unless he has just a terrible something. I don't know what, but there's something that they know that we don't. But it makes me nervous to not know for sure. And as much as I like Bud, and as much as I think he still has upside and has potential, he has been hit or miss with the Steelers. So it wouldn't surprise me at all to see them go edge. And I can't really add much to the things you've said about Carter. I just think, you look at him, if he can add some muscle, if he can add a little more bulk and not lose his athletic ability, not lose his burst, not lose his explosiveness, I think you're absolutely right. His best days could be ahead of him, and that makes him a good potential candidate for the Steelers to look at in the second. So I'm going to go ahead and give you my 3rd guy, since that was my 2nd guy. And this is, again, if Geis isn't there, and they go in another direction, now I have a running back in the 2nd round, and that is Kerryon Johnson from, I think, Auburn or Clemson. Auburn? I can't remember. I'm terrible at trying to remember where these guys are from. But I talked about him with Joe, and I really like him as well. As he gets some Le'Veon Bell type comparisons for patience. I don't know. Again, it's the same thing. I don't know if he can be a 3-down back, but I don't know that he has to be a 3-down back. I like, the way he runs. I like the way he hits holes. I think there is some potential there in the 2nd round for a guy like him.
100%. I think he's a guy that is kind of one of the quieter running backs you don't really hear nearly as much about as you expect, as like the Rashad Pennies, the Sony Michel, all those guys. But when you watch the tape, he kind of has an uptight kind of running style to him, but it works for him and it's manageable. I'd rather see a guy like him who's kind of an upright runner, who still manages to find the holes, has decent vision, than a guy who's just a really kind of narrow frame that just doesn't look like he can withhold an NFL workload. I don't know. I think he has the ability to be a 3-down running back in the league, but even if he's not, again, I don't think the Steelers necessarily need to replace Le'Veon Bell with the Le'Veon Bell if it came to that point and he ultimately ends up walking after 2018. I think having the selection of James Conner last year gives them the flexibility to add really any type of running back they really want, if they think they can get some sort of system working with them. And if he turns into a 3-down running back, then so be it. And Johnson has the ability to kind of go and change directions, change speeds quickly. and kind of go with the flow of the game, which is something that's really kind of hard to teach running backs at any level. So seeing him have that ability right now is why I'm kind of surprised he's kind of flown under the radar as much as he has, but I think that's more just a factor of how deep this running back class is this year. So I think he could be a guy that maybe is on the Steelers' radar. They haven't shied away from looking at Auburn players in the past, so he could be another player that makes that list this year.
Okay, so who is your third guy in the second?
So I was going to put him in the third originally, but I think realistically with the way I think the board could potentially fall, Darius Leonard's a guy that, I've talked about a lot as well. That South Carolina State connection with Javon Hargrave. I don't think he comes out the same low-key pomp and circumstance that Hargrave did coming out of there 2 years ago. But I think when you look at Leonard's game, he's shown at the Combine that he has put on the bulk that made him look like he was going to be an extremely undersized linebacker at the next level, put on some weight and has continued to do so, but it hasn't ruined any single part of his athleticism, which for me is a big deal when you're looking at him as an NFL prospect to kind of hold down the fort as an inside linebacker, even like a versatile edge piece if he had the opportunity to go outside there, depending on one of the Steelers sub packages. You see him. I'd like to see him get a little more nastier at the point of attack. He doesn't really have that grit that I would want from a linebacker leading my defense, but at the same time, his instincts are there as well. He has the ability to kind of move around the field, make plays, find the ball. He's a leader. Those are things for me that I think are way too invaluable. You can get nastier as you get bigger and get stronger. You can kind of build that explosion and build that power. I think by having him in a weight room with NFL coaching staff that are trained to get you faster, get you stronger, get you bigger, I think he'll benefit from that. And realistically, another situation, just like I mentioned with Van Der Esch, if you put him in the Steelers system, have him sit behind Bostic while he gets bigger, gets stronger, kind of learns the system and gets up to that level of NFL talent, he could be a steal in the second round, ultimately when it's all said and done. Because I think he proved at the Shrine Game that he could, I'm sorry, not Shrine Game, the Senior Bowl, that he could stick up there with the elite D1 talent, which is always why you see guys like him kind of come up in the draft process, because he proved that he played small school football, he can still be that guy. So even though I think he has more of a third round grade, I think he's going to be one of those guys who kind of sneaks into the second round just due to the fact that a team will fall in love with who he is as a prospect and what potential he has down the road if he continues to put on weight in an effective manner and kind of put all his game together.
Yeah, my only concern with him is the size, because I think he's still a little undersized. But if he can add, if his frame hasn't maxed out and he can add a little more bulk without it hurting his game, I agree with you. And we've talked about him as well. And I went out and I can't remember the games. There's 2 or 3 games that I watched bits and pieces of his highlights. And the thing that strikes me is how fast this guy is. I mean, when he closes on the ball carrier, on a receiver, he is just burning. As far as his closing speed goes, it's you just kind of go, whoa, hey, how did he do that? Did he just teleport? I don't know. He's really just got awesome closing speed. And he's been productive. He did add 50 pounds in college. That's a lot of weight to add to get him to the point where he's still a little bit undersized. But if he can add some more weight, and we're not talking about another 50, if he can add 20 more, 25 pounds, he's in a really good, linebacker type size at that point. I had him as one of my third round guys because I was wishful thinking. And that was the note I have in front of there is I don't think he'll be here in the third for the Steelers, but wishful thinking, if he was, I would jump on him. So I think you could be right. He could go in the second round. I think he has that type of potential. So we'll jump to the third now, and we'll try and run through these guys because now we're getting to guys where we're in the lower tiers, so to speak. They could be productive in the third round. They could be decent players for the Steelers, but we don't have any fourth round guys because we've got no fourth round picks. So once we start to get the 5th and the 7th, we're going to try and blaze through these guys. But my first guy in the third is a linebacker from Iowa, and so Christine is jumping up and down with joy because he's the outlaw Josie Jewell. And I just want him to say, dying ain't much of a living, boy, because anyone named Josie needs to say that line. If you don't know, it's from the Outlaw Josie Wales. And so the more I've watched of him, the more I like him. I know he had a really solid pro day at Iowa. He is a smart guy. I mean, he's got Tyler Matakevich-like study habits, Tyler Matakevich type instincts for the game, and maybe even more so, but he's better. He's a bit more athletic. He's still, he's not that upper echelon of guys in this draft, but he can be, I think, a very potentially more than serviceable inside linebacker, and a guy who's going to be around the ball, who's going to be smart, who's not going to be out of position, and is going to make a lot of plays. So that's my first guy for the Steelers to look at in the third, again, depending on what they've done in the first two.
I hate to say it, I also have Joel in the third round, but it's no surprise to anybody because I used to not really like him much as a prospect, but as I've watched more tape, gotten back the opportunity to kind of learn more about him, I love what he offers as a linebacker. I think he fits perfectly in what the Steelers try to do on defense. I think, when you look at, like you said, Matakevich, he's a better version. He's more athletic. What really stood out to me is when he went and he had the kind of really just truthfully abysmal 40 time at the combine, which really kind of bugged him evidently. He did an interview after his pro day, and he pretty much said how he was determined to go and get that number down to prove that he could do it. And, he shaved off 0.2 of a second off his 40 time, which is incredible. And for him, as an undersized guy that realistically needs to show that he can have some athletic traits to be really justified 3-down backer, I think he more than held up his own at his pro day. He showed a lot of decent change of direction. He's a football junkie, elite football IQ. He's a leader, vocal leader, lead by example type guy. I just like what he offers. And, I think realistically he's there, and the Steelers miss on a linebacker in the first two. They could take Joel in the third and not really be sitting there wondering if they reached on a backer, because truth be told, I think he could go before the third round. I think the reason he falls to the third round or even the fourth round is just due to those size concerns, which for me, I don't care. I care if you can play football or not. There's certain positions where I care more about size than other positions. But if you can at least play football, you're not, slow as molasses and can at least make plays, I'm fine with you. And Joel has done those. I think he's really kind of put a lot of the athletic concerns to rest with his pro day performances. And hopefully he can keep that going. And wherever he ends up, hopefully in a Steelers jersey, he's able to show that, teams put way too much stock and value in how big a player is.
Yeah. So since Darius Leonard was my other guy in one of my other guys, why don't you do your second guy in the third round?
Yeah. So another guy I had in there was Kaiser White, the safety out of West Virginia. He's kind of, in my eyes, more of a box safety prospect. But the thing is with Kaiser White, he has the ability to also kind of be a cover safety, which is not really what his game is based around. He is a very physical player. He's a very great leader, which, for me, I've said that a lot about a lot of the prospects. I think the Steelers hit on the nose last year. They went with a lot of kind of leader type profile players. I like those types of guys because I don't feel that I need to have the same concern with them off the field as I do other prospects that might be more concerned with drug stuff, other extracurricular activities. So I think a guy like White potentially comes in there, be a hybrid box safety guy who can cover tight ends, which is a thing that you always hear fans wondering is, can they cover Rob Gronkowski? Which you don't draft a guy because he can cover Rob Gronkowski, but having the ability to have a safety that can play all over the area, especially in the box, up front, in the slot, back deep, a guy like White fits that profile for me.
Cool. Yeah, I like him too. But I'm going to go a different direction with my last guy in this round. I don't think it's going to surprise you, except that it may be a bit early for him. And I fell in love with him at the combine. We were talking about it, and as we watched him in the drills, one of your comments to me was, "Those hips, wow!" And so who I'm talking about. It's Nathan Shepard from Fort Hays State. I really think this is a guy who he's not under the radar anymore. He performed well enough at the combine that people are taking notice of him. But I think he's probably late 4th, 5th round pick, but the Steelers don't have a 4th round pick, and I expect him to go in the 4th. So if they want him, they're going to have to take him in the 3rd. And depending on what's there and what's not there, I think this is a guy that could provide very solid depth for them on the defensive line. It's not a position of tremendous need, but again, when you're talking line, either the offense or the defensive side, you can't have enough good guys. And I think this is a guy that could surprise a lot of people and really come on strong as he learns the game more. He's got just bizarre athleticism for his size. And while he didn't play against the best competition, he hasn't had a lot of time in the game. I think there's a lot of potential with him. And so this is a time I wouldn't be upset if they reached just a bit for a guy like Nathan Shepard.
Yeah, I had Shepard in the 5th round, but I think that's being more optimistic than anything, because I think with the right coaching and the right situation, he could very easily be one of these guys from a small school that turns into a stud in the next level. He has the tools, he has the athletic traits. I think he just needs to get the coaching and put it all together, and he'll be set.
All right, so who's your last guy in the 3rd?
I had MJ Stewart. He's kind of like a safety cornerback type guy. I know where he played mostly cornerback at UNC, but I think he can potentially make the move to safety if need be. He's kind of not the big athletic freak that you see a lot of defensive backs coming out now, which I think might be a reason why he could potentially be that hybrid type corner safety guy. He's played inside corner, he's played outside corner, he's played some different variations of safety while at UNC, and that type of versatility we've seen the Steelers kind of taking an affinity for when it comes to making their second day selections. Sean Davis is a prime example. Played a lot of cornerback, played a lot of safety. Had the versatility to do both. And I think when you have a lot of competition going on, a lot of different positions on the defense, if you have a player that can do multiple jobs, that just increases your likelihood of staying on a roster, even if you might not be the best at either one of those jobs. So I think realistically, Stewart's a guy that they've shown interest in. I believe they're bringing him in for a pre-draft visit, or they already brought him in for a pre-draft visit. I think he could potentially sneak his way into the 3rd round for the Steelers if he's there. And if they miss on a defensive back earlier on, he kind of fits 2 potential needs, depending on how the Steelers cornerback depth pans out moving forward.
Yep, and it's, I think he's another one of those types of guys that probably is more a 4th rounder, but because they don't have a 4th round pick, if they're going to take him, they're going to have to take him in the 3rd.
Yep.
So, that's a legitimate issue that they could have this year. If they don't see the guys that they want, they may have to stretch a little bit in the 3rd to get what they need. If there's a spot where they're gonna, we had talked about maybe this is where they might move up if they were going to try and move up to get somebody that they wanted earlier in the 3rd round. But if they don't, they may have to stretch for their pick here in the 3rd. But I think this is a spot where it makes sense if they have to. So as far as the 5th round goes, I'm going to give you – I have 6 guys that I have on my list, and I'm just going to give them to you all at once. I got 2 defensive guys and 4 offensive guys. And Deshaun Elliott is the safety that I have on here. I don't expect him to be there. That's a wishful thinking. If in fact he is there in the 5th early on and they haven't been able to nail down a safety, he could be somebody that they look at. Shaquem Griffin, I like, as a later pick in the 5th round. Give the kid a chance. As they said, all he ever does is succeed wherever he goes, and he can play. Plus, it was fun to watch him have that fastest potential time. Yeah, he's going to have limitations. Let's be realistic, but I think that there's enough there that he could be worth a shot. So he's another guy. Then I got 2 tight ends, Will Dissly and Troy Fumagalali. I can't say his name. And because I think what they're going to look for in a tight end in this draft is more of a blocking type of tight end, Matt Spaethy type of tight end, especially since Chris Hubbard is gone, and he often came in and was that 3rd tight end for them. I think both of these guys can do that. I think Dissly was a defensive lineman or a defensive end who converted. And then I got 2 big giant receivers because I like big giant receivers, and I like names. So Equanimous St. Brown, who a lot of people have even dropping into the 7th. I actually thought he had a decent combine and he's big and tall. He was fast enough for me. And then I like Jaleel Scott out of New Mexico as another potential target late in the fifth. A tall receiver who's got some speed. Both of them are going to be, to a certain extent, projects, but it may be worth a fifth-round flyer on these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I actually had Jaleel Scott on mine as well. I think he's a guy that really is kind of floating under the radar. He reminds me a lot of Martavis Bryant without all the off-the-field issues.
Yep.
Realistically, I think he's a guy that you could see come in there, really be this big target. He doesn't necessarily have the same speed that Bryant had, but I think he has all the other traits you want in a big, physical, long striding receiver that could potentially stretch the field if in the right matchup along the outside. But I also had Durham Smythe. I've never really known. Kind of going with the same thought process you had. He's in my mind, a traditional tight end, inline Y blocker. But the difference between him and another type of, like Fumagalli, like you had, I think he presents a little bit more as a receiver. He wasn't targeted a whole lot at Notre Dame. I don't know if he'll be targeted anymore in the league, but he makes those kind of reminiscent Heath Miller catches over the middle where he's just in the middle of traffic. Everyone's bearing down around him, and he still finds a way to pull the ball in from this absurd radius, knows the hit's coming, but still manages to pull it down. And for me, you're getting the best of both worlds. You're not getting the most athletic tight end, but you're getting a guy you can put in the 2 and 3 tight end sets, kind of trick the defense into thinking he's going to be strictly a blocker. Then all of a sudden, bada bing, bada boom, he's driving down the seam and making this ridiculous catch.
Yeah, I actually like him a lot, and the only reason I didn't have him is I expect him to be gone in the fourth.
Yeah. I think he could realistically go to a lot of different places. It depends on my mind how teams view him as a receiver on top of being a blocker. We know his blocking talent's elite.
Yep.
And then I also had Nathan Shepard, so I'm not going to go over him again. But Tony Adams is another guy, guard from NC State. I think offensive line might not seem like the biggest need right now at this very moment, but when you look at the potential departures of Ramon Foster and or BJ Finney after this season, I think one of the two of them, if not both, end up coming back, but it doesn't hurt to have another, solid interior offensive lineman that could potentially be your guy to not make you feel like you're pressured into paying either one of them too much. I think he's kind of this old school, big, powerful, strong, quick feet, quick-footed guard that could potentially come in there. He has the experience, the 3-year starter from NC State. I think he realistically, even though he doesn't have elite length or elite athleticism, I think he still is just a good enough football player to get the job done and potentially step in after learning behind some guys if the Steelers decided to move on from Foster and or Finney after 2018 was over.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that there's certainly it's rare for the Steelers to go through a full draft and not take somebody on the offensive line. So I'm sure that they're going to pick somebody at some point. We don't have, again, much as we didn't have a 4th round, we don't have any 6th round picks. So we'll jump to the 7th. And I'm going to tell you up front, other than Damon Webb, who is a safety at Ohio State, who I think could still be hanging around and could provide a potential prospect for them to develop. Most of my picks in the 7th round are because I like their names. Because I honestly think when you're starting to get to, for the most part, 7th round guys, it's so hit or miss. These are guys that could go undrafted just as much as they could get picked. So I've got Ray McLeod because who doesn't want somebody named Ray? I've got Brian Allen because we have a Brian Allen, and I want them to stand next to each other and pretend they're twins and when they look nothing alike. I have Chase Litton because I figured why not get a camp quarterback and have everybody assume he's going to be great and awesome, and then he won't be. And then the last one is Zacoven Henderson because his name is Zacoven. And I want a guy with that kind of a name on the team. Look, I'm being upfront. Once we get to the 7th round guys, I don't like to waste tons of time watching tape on these guys because I feel like I got other things to do. So those are my 7th round guys.
Yeah, I went a little different route. I kind of went with guys I felt like could be potential like Keon Adams, Kelvin Beachum type players where they're going to fall for one reason or the other and honestly could go undrafted. Like I know Donnie Ernsberger is one guy Heard last minute from, his agent and from a couple other sources that he had some interest from the Steelers as a kind of an H-back tight end guy. He has a lot of holes in his game. I think realistically he could potentially go undrafted, but in the 7th round, why not? If there's a guy that goes to go undrafted, you're picking at the end of the draft anyway. Take him if you like him. Braxton Berrios, he's kind of like the standard, New England Patriots, small, tiny slot receiver type player that should go higher than he will, but he's not, just because, he's 5'9", not exactly over the top athletic, but when you think of a standard slot receiver, he pops into my mind very quickly. Plus, he brings a lot as a punt returner as well. He's a leader, very intelligent player. In the 7th round, that could be a bargain if he turns into something. I picked Joe Osman, edge rusher from Central Michigan, because I think he is this year's Keon Adams. Another guy where talent wasn't there around him, but he still managed to make plays. Has potential to be kind of like a developmental edge rusher who turns into a potential steal. Never necessarily an elite player, but a very dependable rotational piece on your edge. I also picked Trey Walker just because he's another guy, another defensive back from Louisiana Lafayette, who has this versatility to be a solid safety, be a solid corner, move him around wherever you think he potentially fit. Hit or miss type of prospect, but that's, in my opinion, all the 7th round really is just seeing guys that you like one trait or two traits of theirs you think potentially bring out and be a special team stud, or just find some way to use in some way or another.
Absolutely. All right, so I think we've given folks a lot to think about. We've certainly taken up enough of their time this evening. But, Zach, I want to thank you for joining us again. It's always a pleasure. We'll have to try and get on, during our post-draft podcasts that we'll do probably each night after every round. Or do a full recap and see what you think of how we did versus how we guessed. So, again, thanks for coming on, and appreciate the time. Tell everybody again, real quick, how they can find you, follow you, see you out on the interwebs.
You can find me on Twitter at GZSports_ZM. I'm on there frequently, always looking forward to talk draft and Steelers stuff with all of you.
Absolutely, and I'm at Cannons Don't Thun. If you want to know what it was about, you can text me, but it was a Jimmy Buffett song. Anyway, last but not least, if you like the podcast, give us a subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook, not on Facebook. Well, yeah, follow us on Facebook. What the heck? But on Twitter as well. And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. Until next time, everybody, it's chaos out there. Be kind.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.